Hey, this is Chris Chase, and welcome to the first Player Haters podcast. This will basically be 5 or 10 minutes of me ranting about the Redskins. I figured in 2004, when Joe Gibbs came back, I was so elated that I created this blog because I felt the need to share my joy with I won't say the world, with the 11 people who read it that day. And this is pretty much the exact opposite of that. Now that the Redskins have hit a low point, I figure that starting a new medium might be fun. I considered doing this for a while, and today seemed like a good day in the spirit of change, as the Redskins are doing. Hopefully, this won't fail as badly as the Redskins project is doomed to. First things first, my key question about why Jim Zorn was stripped of play calling duties is, I think when you make a move like this, you have to evaluate whether the team is better off right now than it was before this move was made. And the answer can't be yes. The whole reason that Zorn wasn't to be fired, at least the people who thought that Zorn shouldn't be fired last week or 2 weeks ago or after the Detroit loss, the whole thinking behind it was who will call plays. It was a logical argument. Even though Snyder and Serrato should have had someone capable in the coaching staff who could call plays in case this happened, they have no foresight whatsoever, obviously. But you'd think that if you're going to strip Zorn of play calling, you're not going to give it to someone who, as of 2 weeks ago, was completely unfamiliar with the Redskins playbook. Yes, Sherm Lewis has been in the NFL a long time, had been in the NFL a long time, but 2 weeks ago, as has been well reported, he was playing bingo and doing Meals on Wheels. How can he possibly know the Redskins playbook well enough to call plays? Kids who play Madden 2010 are probably more familiar with the Redskins playbook than Sherm Lewis. So are the Redskins better off today? No, they're almost certainly not. If Zorn was fired, as he should have been, would the Redskins have been better off? That's at least debatable. It's not a definite no, like the Sherm Lewis thing is. I said yes. I always said, okay, you need to fire Zorn because if you watched the game yesterday, the team was completely apathetic, the fans were even more so, and there was no fire. At least getting rid of Zorn makes the season salvageable, not from a playoff standpoint, because this team's not going to the playoffs, but at least it gives the team an identity, and at least it gives them something to hold, to grasp onto. If they're 4-7, 4-8, and Snyder decides to fire Zorn, those guys aren't going to care in December. The fans aren't going to show up. At least doing it before a Monday night game, there might be some renewed enthusiasm. And I'm just baffled by how the one thing Snyder used to be good at, which was firing people, he is now completely a failure at. He can't even do what he used to do well. He can't even fire people. He's completely regressed. This is very disconcerting. Before, he'd fire you with the drop of a hat. Says 7-6 in 2000, still well in the playoff hunt. Get the hell out of here, Norv Turner. Now we're 2-4, and he can't fire Jim Zorn. I'm baffled by how the mind of Snyder and Serrato works. All their bad moves, not all their bad moves, most of their bad moves are explainable. You can see where they're coming from. Signing Hainsworth, a guy who's a great defensive player, but as we've seen in the past couple weeks, notoriously takes plays off and he's out of shape. At least that makes sense. He's a good player. He can affect change. Throwing money after Spurrier, it was a disaster, but at the time, it made sense. Going after Cowher and doing all this makes sense. Keeping Serrato, Snyder wants to keep the power. That makes sense. It's wrong-headed. It's not the right move, but at least you can kind of see what the line of thinking is. I do not see what the line of thinking is in giving Sherm Lewis play calling duties. And I wonder what Snyder's goal is for the season. I suppose the only logic in switching the play calling is that he thinks this team can still make the playoffs. There's no way they can make the playoffs. They're an awful football team. Right now, they're the worst football team in the NFL. Because at least other teams that are crappy played with passion yesterday and played with purpose. The Redskins did neither. And swapping Jim Zorn's duties isn't going to make that happen. They're not all of a sudden going to say, oh, you know what, let's play for this guy now that he's not calling plays. Sherm will fix it. That's not going to happen. So I wonder what Snyder thinks. Does he not realize? Of course he doesn't realize. He thinks that they're 2-4, and he thinks that because mathematically they're not eliminated, that they can go on a run and salvage the season. It's not going to happen. Clearly, it's not going to happen with the guy who didn't know the playbook 2 weeks ago. It's mind-boggling that he could possibly think this. What this is more likely to accomplish is it's going to alienate players and fans even more. The Monday night game next week should be, from a voyeuristic point of view, it should be hilarious. The stadium was half empty yesterday. I can only imagine what it's going to be like on Monday night. In the past couple of years, especially since FedEx Field has kind of come along in the past, what is it now, 12 years, Monday night's not as much of an event as it used to be because driving on the Beltway out to Landover is a pain in the ass for people who live even close to the stadium. People who live in Virginia, I can't imagine coming from Northern Virginia up the Beltway to go see a game. It takes you 2 hours to get there from Arlington, let's say. If that. I mean, it could be even more. And last year we saw the Steelers game where it was all Steelers fans, and I say all, let's say 50-50 Steelers fans. I think it's going to be a lot like that. At least people showed up. The Redskins were 6-2 in that game. They were 6-2 playing for 7-2 and to become the best team in the NFL, and people still sold their tickets. Can you imagine what's going to happen next week when the Eagles come to town? I mean, people from Philly don't travel as well as people from Pittsburgh, but there could still be a lot of Eagles fans there. It's going to be a huge embarrassment, particularly when Sherman Lewis calls his first 3rd and 12 screen pass to Malcolm Kelly, who then drops it or spikes himself or gets tackled by Fred Davis. It's going to be a debacle, like this whole team is. And that's the story of the 2009 Redskins, and all this talk about who they're going to hire and whether Serrato gets fired. I'm not the first person to say this or the last person to say this, but it all comes from the top, and nothing is going to change unless Snyder sees the error of his ways. And you'd think, looking at an empty stadium yesterday, you'd think these sorts of things can't escape his thought process. I'm sure he has people talking to him from all ears, and all these stories about him. He can't be stupid, can he? He's stupid about the way he runs his team, but he can't be a stupid man. So, how can he go to a stadium yesterday, watch 50,000 people show up to a 90,000 seat stadium, and still think this team is on the right track? Nobody watching that game yesterday could possibly think the Washington Redskins are a playoff team. Nobody who watched that team yesterday could think that handing play calling duties to a 67-year-old man who's been out of football for years is going to make this a playoff team. Nobody can think this offensive line is going to all of a sudden improve so much that the Redskins are going to start putting touchdowns on the board. It's not going to happen. But the delusion of Dan Snyder believes it's going to happen, so this is the way it is. If the team happens to beat the Eagles, which is possible, this is not college football, this is not Florida versus Sam Houston State. The Redskins can beat the Eagles. The Eagles aren't that good, as evidenced by the Raiders beating them yesterday. And the Redskins, while terrible, still have talent enough to win. NFL games hinge on a couple plays. The Redskins can win the game. What happens then? Then you can't fire Zorn going into the bye week because people think, okay, the experiment's working. Whether or not it's 2 defensive touchdowns or Donovan McNabb throwing 3 interceptions or just a fluke play or two, people won't care about that. It's like I wrote about for Yahoo today how Brad Childress and Dick Duran lucked out yesterday when their terrible play call or terrible decisions at the end of the games ended up working out in the long run for them, even though they should have lost their teams the game. It's the same thing next week. Even if the offense doesn't improve that much, if they win the game, then Zorn's unfireable, and then you're stuck with him the rest of the year. And then by December, 50,000 people is going to turn to 40,000. There was a game after Christmas. Can you imagine that weekend? I don't even know if it's a home game. I don't have the schedule in front of me. But let's say that's a home game, and it's 30 degrees and kind of crappy weather. You think people are going to show up to watch a 4-9 team play against the Raiders? You don't make decisions for the fans. You don't make decisions so people will keep staying fans of the team. You make decisions so your football team can put the best foot forward. Not firing Jim Zorn keeps the Redskins both feet behind the line. Sherman Lewis isn't going to improve things. Maybe firing Jim Zorn wasn't going to improve things, but at least it gave them a shot. Now the season is even more of a disaster than it was. They're the laughingstock of the league. They will continue to be. And frankly, no coach with any sense is going to come into this mess next year. This is what Dan Snyder hath wrought. and it'll be very interesting to see if the fans continue to stay with the team. I'm still a Redskins fan, and the voyeur in me loves watching the debacle, but it's one big joke. That's about 10 minutes of me just ranting, so I think we'll close it out there. This has been the first Player Haters podcast. Again, I apologize for the crappy sound quality. I'm talking directly into my computer. And hopefully we'll do some more of these and get maybe a guest or two or someone else to talk to. But if you listened, I hope you enjoyed it. And hail to the Redskins? Question mark?